Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Tales from the Fandom. Today, I am joined by a Twitch streamer that I happened to come across through being a part of Hyrule Gaming Group's chat, and I have had the pleasure of witnessing them play a number of incredible games on Twitch. I have today Mother Gamer joining me. How are you doing today, Mother Gamer?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I am doing all right. I am, like I said, I had happened across your Twitch handle. I think Hillian of Hyrule Gaming Group had mentioned you a few times, and you're in chat, like hanging out, like a lot of us do, watching Animal Crossing. But I remember checking out your stream. Like you're I think Hillian had mentioned you a few times about like checking out Mother Gamer, and I have to say, and we'll be talking about video games later in the episode, but your playthrough of Spiritfarer was incredible. I think you were the first person I watched play that game on Twitch, and I loved it. It's one of those games where I really want to play it, but I just don't have the time.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love Spiritfarer a lot because it was something so different. Like, yes, it has Stardew Valley vibes and kind of Harvest Moon vibes, but the topic that it talks about, because it talks about death and dying, but it does it in a way that's not scary. Like, it's a very gentle and thoughtful approach. And I love how thoughtful everyone was who worked on this game, because apparently each person that worked on the game, each of the characters, was someone that they had loved, a friend, a family member that had passed away. So you could really tell that it was this celebration of love and life, and just having gentle reminders throughout the game that just because people are gone doesn't mean you just forget about them. Like, they live on in your memories and your stories and your songs. And I thought that was really, really cool. And so I absolutely love playing it. That's such a great game, and if you haven't played it, you definitely should. Make some time to, because it's such a good game and it's such a good story. And have a box of tissues, because you will cry throughout the game. But it's so well done. I absolutely love it.
Absolutely. I love one of the mechanics in there is just to give somebody a hug.
Yes. Yeah, I love the fact that you can hug each character in the game. Just, oh, okay, I'd like a hug. And I'm just like, that's so sweet. Because sometimes, not everyone is a hugging person, but for the people that are, I thought that was like a really, really cool thing to put in the game.
Absolutely. Now, like I said, we'll be talking about video games later, but as people who listen to the podcast may be aware of, because I like to mention it so frequently in every episode, I generally send out a list of like, hey, what do people want to talk about? And you gave me a great assortment of things that we'll be talking about, but the biggest one that we're going to kick things off with is, yet again, I think your episode is going to actually be the first episode of 2021, granted, as long as no apocalypse happens between the time that we're recording in November and January. So crossing my fingers for that. But it's I think it's one of the biggest fandoms that I have not engaged in or watched, even though I've had numbers of people guesting on this podcast talking about it, and that is Doctor Who.
Yeah. I am a big Doctor Who fan. So I grew up on classic Doctor Who. Tom Baker was my first ever doctor. And my grandmother is the person that got me into Doctor Who. So my grandmother was a big nerd, and she read science fiction books when they weren't popular, when everybody thought they were weird when she was a kid. So she had tons of science fiction books. She's the reason I love Doctor Who. She's the reason I love things like Star Trek and science fiction books. So PBS would show classic Doctor Who episodes on Saturday nights at about like 11 p.m. And usually she would tell us throughout the week, well, it's a school night, you have to go to bed. But Saturday nights, I was curious about Doctor Who. She was watching a Doctor Who episode and had Tom Baker in it, and I was fascinated by him because he was so lively and energetic and making jokes, and he had this really bright, colorful scarf with like all these different colored stripes. I was like, he looks like a crazy person. But I was just like, who is this? And I sat down next to her on the couch and she said, oh, do you want to watch this with me? And I said, okay. And I was about 11 when I started watching with her. And so Saturday nights, we would sit together on the couch. She would actually let me stay up late to watch the entire episode. We would watch Doctor Who together. And it was classic Who episodes. And I love Tom Baker, but sometimes they would show the old black and white ones as well, with the first ever Doctor with William Hartnell. And then after him came John Pertwee. And I liked William Hartnell a lot because he was the first one and he was a little grumpier. And the companion was his granddaughter, Susan. And Susan always called him grandfather, like he was her grandfather. But then they changed it. And the thing is they changed it because Hartnell was actually sick. And my grandmother would actually tell me these facts about Doctor Who. And she said, that was his idea. And I remember sitting there next to her on the couch going, what do you mean? And she said, well, he was sick and he was getting older. And so he came up with this idea, well, to keep the show going, what if the Doctor changed? Like he's still the Doctor, but he takes on an entirely different form, different body. Like he can change. And I said, really? And I was fascinated by that. So I grew up watching Doctor Who with my grandmother and seeing each incarnation of the Doctor. And Baker is my favorite. He's always going to be my favorite, but I like the others too. I thought Pertwee was really cool, but Tom Baker is the one that I grew up on and that I was familiar with. And the fact that my grandmother let me stay up late on Saturday nights just to watch it with her, I thought that was really cool. And then we would talk about the episodes. And then there was one episode of Doctor Who with Tom Baker that scared the heck out of me. It was called The Talons of Weng Chang. And basically, they had this doll. It was an actor, but they had the person with the doll like coming out and killing people. And it freaked me out. And I was a kid and I had my grandmother actually check my closet and under my bed because one of the scenes was he came out from under the bed and he killed the person. I was terrified. Like the little kid me was going, oh no. I was like, oh no, what is happening? And it scared me. And I was sitting there on my bed and my grandmother was like, okay, it's time to go to bed. And I said, can you check under the bed and check under the closet for me? And she stared at me and goes, really? I said, yeah, I feel like maybe there's something under the bed. I don't know. And she sat with me. She goes, it's an actor, right? She said, it's not real. It's make-believe. It's made up. And I said, can you check anyway? And she humored me. She said, see, there's nothing there. It's fine. And she says, the episode scared you, didn't it? And I said, yeah, a lot. Because it was 2 parts. It was a 2-part episode. So it ended on a cliffhanger. And I'm just going, oh, okay, great, that's fine. And I was worried. And then we got to watch part 2 the next week, and I was like, oh, okay, that's what happens. And now that I'm an adult, like I can laugh at it because I think it's a great couple of episodes. I really like the story for it. And it is a Tom Baker episode, but when I was a kid, it scared me. Just the idea of, oh, the doll comes to life and it goes around just on a murder spree. So I was like, oh no. And my grandmother sat with me and she said, look, it's just a TV show. She's like, it's not real. It's made up. It's an actor. And she goes, I guess that tells you how good the Doctor Who stories are if something scared you that badly. She goes, because it means they did their job. They told the story. And I said, yeah, that's true. And I said, I know it's not real. And I told her that too. I said, I know it's not real, but subconsciously, I was like, I feel like, I was just like, but I kind of feel like maybe what if? And
Hmm.
she goes, well,
Absolutely.
yeah. And she goes, well, that's the point of Doctor Who. It's like, well, what if this happens? What would you do? And she said, but the other side of that is, shows the Doctor is a protector. Like he tries to protect everyone. And it made me feel better, but she let me sleep with the light on because I was like, please don't turn out the light. So she left my lamp on. And that was like the only episode of Doctor Who that really scared me as a kid, which is kind of funny because the rest of them, like you could tell that sometimes the episodes were on a budget because originally the Daleks, it was cardboard and pantyhose cups. Like you could tell that it was like the egg cups from pantyhose containers.
Right.
And they're just like, we made it, the crew, and when you see some of the interviews with them, they said, well, we made it work, and then we got more money and then it was fine. so so seeing the Daleks now is really different because I remember like the classic Who Daleks with like the pantyhose cups, and now they're a little more advanced and a little more elaborate. And I like the new Doctor Who as well. Like I think it's really cool to see a new generation of kids and young people getting into it because the Doctor is really cool, and there's all these different and there's so many different stories, and each one has something unique, and each person has a favorite Doctor, which I also think is great. Like there's so many incarnations of the Doctor that everyone has a favorite or two favorites, because I really love Tom Baker, but I also really like David Tennant. Like I adored him. I thought he was great, and I was really sad when he was done. Um, but yeah, my grandmother is the reason I got hooked on science fiction and Doctor Who. And that's one of like my best memories of her, of just like sitting on the couch like late Saturday night, just watching Doctor Who.
That's one of the things that I absolutely adore is hearing stories, and I've had it with a few other guests where they experience their first fandoms, whether it's like watching Star Wars or watching Star Trek with their parents or with their
Yeah,
grandparents in your case. And it's one of those things where it builds such a connection not only to your relationship with your grandmother, but it ties it to that show or that property so much that it's just ingrained in you for the rest of your life. Like it's such a big
yeah.
influence, like it's always going to be there. And I love hearing everyone's stories about them getting into something through like a family member or a close friend. And I absolutely adore that.
Yeah, she was an interesting lady, and she knit me a Doctor Who scarf. I actually asked her, because I actually became obsessed with Tom Baker, and I was like, I loved his scarf. And I think it's really subtle to notice, but so there's one season where he has like that scarf, and it's all like brown and tan. And then I think it was like season 8 or season 12 of his incarnation as a Doctor, they started adding more colors to it, and it was like purple. So there's some purple mixed in, and that was the one I liked. And my grandmother spent the entire like Thanksgiving and Christmas, and she knit me a Doctor Who scarf, and she made it for me, and she gave it to me for a Christmas gift. And she told me, "Don't ever tell me that I don't love you." She goes, because there is so much brown and tan in the Doctor's scarf. And she's like, there's some purple in there. And she's like, but there's a lot of brown and tan. And she's like, so much brown and tan. But I was thrilled. I wore it everywhere. I wore it everywhere. I wore it until it got like old and frayed, and she would fix it up and restitch it. And I was so sad when it finally died because it just got to be old, and I took really good care of it and it lasted a long time. But after I had my first daughter, I mentioned that scarf, and I said, do you remember that scarf? I was like, I love that scarf. And so Christmas that year, she knit me another one. And I was just like, I was blown away by that, because it was like, I was a kid, and she's like, well, you're my kid. And she's like, and I knew you wanted another scarf, so I made you one. And I was like, okay, but I love that scarf. I wore it out so much because I wore it everywhere.
That's awesome. you've answered a lot of my questions about Doctor Who, the ones that I would normally ask, like who's your favorite Doctor, and like favorite episodes and stuff like that. But what is the thing that not only attracted you to Doctor Who, but what is it that keeps you watching and keeps you coming back to the show?
So the one thing I've always loved about the Doctor and about the show is that what he says, and well, now she says, because Jodie Whittaker is the new Doctor, is what they say about humanity. What the Doctor says about humanity, that yes, humans are flawed and they're not, we're not perfect, but there are humans that stand out, that know how to stand up for each other, that know how to do the right thing. You know, like there's all you find out that there's aliens, and some of the aliens are good and some of them are bad, and sometimes humans aren't necessarily good either, but but there are far more good humans. According to the Doctor, there are far more good humans in the world, in the universe, that are willing to stand up for each other and are willing to do the right thing. And that, to me, is beautiful. Just the way Doctor Who tells those stories, that, it's okay to be scared, but even if you're scared, you still do the thing anyway. And, even if you feel like things are hopeless, there's still hope. I always appreciate the positive messages that Doctor Who episodes put into their story, even when they're sad episodes. They still, add that, just that little touch of just like, well, yes, it's sad, and sometimes sad things happen, but you still keep going on. You still pick yourself up and you still keep trying. So I always appreciated that. I think I appreciate it now more when that I'm adult and I'm a mom, because when I was a kid, I was like, wow, this is really cool. I like all the stories that, I like the Doctor. He's really neat. And then as I got older, I started noticing more and more that a lot of the messages were like, hey, nobody's perfect, and that's okay. You just keep trying, you keep doing what you're supposed to do. And, and it's like David Tennant's Doctor, one of the episodes, he said, when humanity comes together, he's like, they're giants. And I'm just like, that was such a beautiful sentiment. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly right. Like when people come together and they're willing to work together and support each other and just be loving and accepting, like we can do almost anything. And I think that's a really cool idea. And that's just what I love the most about Doctor Who, is that it just celebrates all those things, like, yeah, we're different, but look how beautiful we are when we work together and we care about each other. And I'm just like, and I want more episodes like that. I hope Doctor Who goes on forever, honestly, because I love seeing the new Who, and I love seeing it. Just it makes me smile seeing like how many young people love it just as much, and like the cosplays they come up with and the costume ideas and fan art, like that to me is incredible.
Now, as a longtime person of not watching the series, well, one of my favorite things is always to ask, like, where would you recommend I get started? Because a number every time it's always something different. Somebody says like, oh, start at the Tenant series, or you can start with Jodie Whittaker.
Right.
Some people suggest like certain episodes, like, oh, just watch this episode and then just start the series. Like, where would you say a
Mm.
good starting point would be?
Well, so I'm a classic Who kid. So honestly, probably Tom Baker, because he has so many seasons and he has so many really good episodes. If you wanted to start with like the new one, I definitely say David Tennant, because he made that his own through and through. Like Baker and Tennant are both incredible, and they both made the Doctor their own. Like if you're going for classic stuff, definitely start with Tom Baker. If you want to check out the new stuff, I definitely go David Tennant.
Okay, that is fair enough. Now, we've talked about Doctor Who, and you mentioned something in Doctor Who that we're gonna talk about now. And
Okay.
again, it's got that ties to your grandmother, which is also super cool. Is that And again, for people that listen to this podcast, I love talking about random things. I love talking about things that people love to talk about. And one of those that you love to do is knitting.
Yes, I do.
Normally people would say, but David, knitting isn't a fandom. Um, have you checked out what people make nowadays? With like the knitting, I don't know. They're knitting needles, right? Like
Yeah, you
that's what
use
they're
knitting
called.
needle.
Yeah. So have you checked out what people are making with the knitting needles nowadays? Like some of the stuff is incredible. And I have a cosplayer friend who, and it might not be knitting, but she crochets all of her cosplay outfits.
Oh wow,
So
that's cool.
yeah, so it's something where I feel knitting can be talked about, and you have that passion for knitting. So let me start off by, how did you get into knitting? Because it's not something that's like, I guess I can't say it's not a popular thing, but it's not something that everyone just is like, you know what, I'm gonna go take up knitting.
Yeah. So my grandmother, again, ties into my grandmother. So my grandmother would knit all the time. She knit and crochet, and she did cross stitch. She did all kinds of crafts. She, like, I think she even like learned how to like bake cheese bread one summer, um, just because she wanted to. But she had been knitting forever. And one of the things I remember, because, and that ties into Doctor Who also, is she was knitting whenever we would sit on the couch and watch it. She knit sweaters for everyone, like all the time. She knit sweaters, she knit baby blankets. And I always remember her, especially during the winter, like during fall and winter, because she would knit sweaters and like blankets and shawls for people for Christmas, or if they had a baby or if they had a birthday, she would knit them something. So I always remember her just sitting there, just knitting, knitting sweaters, and she would knit sweaters for us, and she knit me the Doctor Who scarf. So she tried to teach me how to knit when I was a kid, and I was just terrible at it. I was so frustrated by it because I couldn't get anything right. I couldn't get the stitches right. I couldn't figure out how to cast on onto the knitting needles. So you have to do a technique called cast on. So you basically are looping the yarn onto your knitting needles, and it's basically, and you have like a slip knot that's basically like the anchor for when you knit that first row. Then you knit the second row, right? I couldn't get that right at all. And my grandmother tried. And we were sitting there and she goes, okay, do it like this. Like she's trying to teach me a simple garter stitch, which is you knit every row. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And the yarn got tangled. It got tangled in my knitting needles. And the yarn became like, it looked like a cat threw up. And I'm sitting there going, I'm not good at this. And she's just looking at it and sighing, going, well, no, you're not very good at this. And I kind of gave up. Like I tried and I said, I'm sorry, I don't think this is for me. And she said, that's okay. Um, I did better at cross stitch because we tried crochet too, but I'm left-handed, so crochet is harder because it seems to be more designed for right-handed people. But she tried to teach me how to crochet, and that didn't go well either. So she goes, "Well, you know what? Let's try sewing." Um, so I did better at sewing, and I did better at cross stitch, and that I was good at. Like I could handle that. I could handle sewing. I knew how to work the sewing machine too. So fast forward later, I'm a grown up. My daughters are pretty much almost grown. And my husband Ron is sitting there going, really? Because I said, I think I kind of want to try to teach myself how to knit. I think it would be neat. I think I want to try again. I think I want to do it. Ron is staring at me going, are you sure? I said, yeah. And my first time, and I taught myself how to knit. Like I used knitting books and I used YouTube videos. And my favorite one is by this lady. It's called Knitting Tips by Judy, because she slows down the video so you can actually see what her hands are doing, so you know what to do. And of course, I tried knitting. I tried knitting a scarf. It didn't go well. I did everything wrong. I couldn't figure out how to do anything again. I had to rip everything out. And I'm sitting there sighing, going, I'm really terrible at this, but I really want to be good at this. So I just kept practicing basically. I kept knitting and then ripping stitches out and then trying again. And eventually I was actually able to knit my first scarf. It was a garter stitch, you know, it's just knit every row. So it was really easy. And during this time, my grandmother would call and ask, how's it going? And I told her about it. And when I told her that I had to rip out all the stitches and start over, she started laughing. She goes, do you know how many times I had to rip out stitches in a sweater because I dropped a stitch? She goes, or because I realized I knit a row wrong. I said, I don't know. She goes, at least 50 times. She goes, every knitter goes through this. She goes, you realize, oh no, I did a bad thing. And then you have to rip it out. And she goes, and then you swear a lot. And then you start over. I said, okay. So eventually I did get better. And then I started trying to challenge myself to knit more things because I got really great at knitting hats and scarves. So I was like, okay, well, what's next? So then I tried throw blankets and then I did great at that. And I was like, okay. And my grandmother was very encouraging. She was just like, okay. She said, okay, well, I'm really proud of you for actually learning how to do this. She's like, that's really great. And then she laughed when I said, I kind of want to challenge myself to knit a sweater. And she laughed at me. She laughed and laughed and said, good luck. And I said, why did you say it like that? And she said, because she's like, you'll find out. And I was like, but you knit sweaters all the time. She goes, yes, but I never told you about the first sweater I ever tried to knit. And I said, okay. So she goes, start with something small. So my best friend had her first child, my godson. And I was like, I'm going to try and knit a baby sweater. Like, how hard can that be? It's small, it's less parts. Basically, what I came up with, I didn't know how to sew the sleeves on correctly. So I tried to watch a YouTube video to do it. And one sleeve looked right. And then one sleeve was longer than the other and it was lopsided. So it looked like it belonged it belonged to a creature from the Addams family. And I'm staring at it, just going, I did this wrong. I did something wrong. What did I do? And I took a picture and I sent it to my aunt to show to my grandmother. And I said, well, what did she say? And my aunt texted me back, your grandmother won't stop laughing. So I'm just going, okay. And then she called me. She goes, okay, now that you've had your first disaster sweater, she goes, let me tell you about my first sweater. She's like, she's like, I knit the sweater. She goes, and I forgot to put a neck hole in the sweater. She goes, so when your dad tried to put it on, his head got stuck in the sweater. And I'm sitting there going, well, what do I do? She goes, you just have to start over. She goes, learn from this. She goes, and learn how to make a better sweater. She's like, it takes practice. It takes time. She's like, you're not going to be able to knit a sweater right away. So, you know, she laughed at me, but then she helped me and she gave me some advice on, you know, using like marking pins to where to put the sleeves. And the next sweater went a lot better. And so, you know, I started challenging myself more and more. So I was like, okay, well, I'll knit a sweater for myself. Surprisingly, that went better than the baby sweater. And then I started knitting kid sweaters for my nieces and nephews, and that went better. And then I decided I was going to knit socks, and that was a disaster too. It's just like, so each time I tried to challenge myself to knit something challenging, the first time it would go badly and it would just look really bad. I have to redo it. I just have to rip it out and start over. Yeah, but I learned and now I can knit socks, I can knit sweaters, you know, I can knit all those things like all the time now. And so knitting is actually a lot of fun. And it's also relaxing for me because sometimes, um, sometimes I have like really, really terrible days with my anxiety. And so I have anxiety and depression, and sometimes I have really bad days with it. And as weird as it sounds to say, maybe it's not weird, but knitting centers me, like, because I'm able to just like focus on the pattern and the stitches and just knit. And it's just like this very calming, repetitive thing. And I find that when I knit, I'm less anxious and like I always feel better after like knitting for a couple hours. And the other side of that too is like if you're trying to learn like how to knit, Don't expect it to be perfect right away. It's just not gonna happen. And don't be afraid to rip stitches out because I still make mistakes sometimes. A scarf I was knitting a couple weeks ago, I realized I misread the pattern and I screwed up an entire row and I had to rip the entire thing out and start over. And and I kind of thought of my grandmother because I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, she was right. I'm just because I realized I was swearing under my breath as I was pulling out every stitch. Going, well, now we have to start over. But but now, that scarf's almost finished and it's perfect this time. Sometimes you just have to rip the stitches out and start over. But it's something I love doing, and I taught myself to knit. Oh gosh, 10 years ago. I've been knitting for 10 years now. Wow, that makes me feel old. But yeah, but I love it. It's something that's really nice and calming for me. Plus, you can just like take this yarn and you can just create anything with it. And you can create like all these different things. One of my friends, she asked for dishcloths, and she's a Star Trek nerd. So like she and I love Star Trek and we talk about it. So I knit her some dishcloths with the Star Trek insignia in them.
Nice.
Yeah, and she was so thrilled because she's just like, she said it, she's like, "Are these real?" She's like, "You really made these?" And I said, "Yes, I really made those. Merry Christmas." And she was, "Oh my God." And she loved them. And then she asked me if I would knit her some more. And I was like, okay. Yeah, so I knit her dishcloths with like the Star Trek insignia, and I knit her some Doctor Who ones with the TARDIS knit into them. So so yeah, you can knit like anything. There's all kinds of patterns out there, and there's and people have like knit like the Doctor Who scarves as well. And I think one person that I know, they knit like Matt Smith's like bow tie. So I like the idea that you can just like take something and just make something really cool with it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask if you had made or created anything through your knitting that tied to fandom, but you answered that question too. Out of curiosity, have you made a Who scarf for yourself and tackled the browns and tans?
I have. I actually have, and it takes a really, really long time. Um, so there's a website I use that's for crafters, Ravelry. They actually have a Doctor Who scarf knitting group, and there is a lady that very nicely got all the charts, the knitting charts from each season for the Tom Baker scarf, and it shows you exactly how many colors are in each scarf, and it was a really nice way. And apparently it's just a regular, you can either do like a garter stitch or a stockinette stitch. So stockinette stitch is you knit one row and then you purl the next row. It basically makes the scarf stretchy.
Okay.
um, so yeah, she actually spent the time and shared the charts with everyone, and it shows you exactly like how many colors you need. And honestly, I think it's like the season 4 Tom Baker scarf. That's the one that has a lot, so much tan and brown. And I did try to knit it, and I think I finished it. Yeah, I finished, but it took a long, long time. I think it took me like all year because there's so much tan and brown in that scarf. So much tan and brown. I was just thinking to myself, oh man, my grandmother was right. It's like, this is so much tan. Um, and the funny thing about that scarf is the prop lady, they told her just knit the scarf. And she was okay. But they didn't tell her how long to make it. They just said just knit it. So she thought they meant use every single ball of yarn that was there. So she did. They said, that's not what we meant at all. And she said, well, what do you want me to do? But Tom Baker liked it. He thought it was funny. So he just wore it. It just became part of his wardrobe.
Absolutely. It's one of those signature things for that character. It's always incredible to me when I see people that are able to do tasks with their hands and make something out of like cloth or yarn, and I'm always just so impressed on having that manual dexterity, because it's one of the things that I do not have. And it's like, dang, that'd be really cool to like sit down and craft something, but that is not anything that my hands can do. But that is really awesome, and I love that not only it was something from your grandmother yet again, but you have you're able to do stuff and tie it to the things that you love, like Doctor Who and Star Trek, and it's awesome.
Thank you.
Now, when I introduced you at the beginning, we talked about I mentioned that you streamed on Twitch, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the as I introduced you, you are Mother Gamer,
Hmm.
which obviously implies two things. One, you're a mother, which okay, but second, you're a gamer.
Yeah.
Now, I don't find now. Granted, I speak from the age that I am, where like my mother did not play video games. I was like the 80s generation of Nintendo and everything forward. Um I know a lot of people now, a lot of mothers now that are listening in their 20s and 30s, totally mother gamers.
Right.
Um Now how did you first get into video games?
Um, so first game I ever played was Space Invaders on the Atari 2600. So my dad was in the military, and we lived in a place in Arkansas, and one of the ladies, her and my mom were friends, and she had two boys, and they had an Atari, and so they would hang out together, and we'd sit there playing video games. So I was like 5 or 6, but we sat there playing video games. And I was like, this is really cool, and just like playing Space Invaders, and I really loved it. And my dad was like, do you like that? And I said, yeah. So he actually ended up getting an Atari for our house, and then he would actually sit there. And he wasn't really big into video games. He's still not really into them, but he liked sitting there with me and actually playing the game with me. So, so I really liked it. And of course, we had come a long way since the Atari and the graphics. And then, but I always loved like going to the arcade. Um, but that was the game that got me like hooked on video games. I was like, this is really neat. I really like this. And then, of course, with my mom's side of the family, there's like a bunch of cousins, and everybody plays video games. Like all the kids, like they would always get all the kids in and just like go play video games. Like, oh, okay. So we did that, and then my grandparents got us a Nintendo, original Super Nintendo, for Christmas one year. And my grandparents were terrible at it. Like they didn't know what to do. They hit the wrong buttons. And one of my brothers and I were sitting there showing them like how to play Super Mario, and I liked Super Mario, but the game that got me interested like fully, because like Space Invaders, I loved it. It was like gaming's cool. Super Mario Brothers was cool, but we played, so it's called Dragon Quest now, but when I was a kid, it was Dragon Warrior.
Yes.
And and my brother Rob and I are sitting there, and we're playing Dragon Warrior 3. And I just remember we spent like the entire afternoon trying to figure out how to level grind, where to go for a quest, and we were following the story, and we were taking turns like finding the monsters. And I was fascinated. I was fascinated by the story. I was fascinated by the fact that you could just explore this entire map and go places, and and figuring out like, oh well, you're too low level for this area, so just taking turns running around level grinding this character and playing the story. And we played that game like all week for like 2 weeks. um and then we finished it, and it was just this rush of like, oh my god, we finished the story, we did all the things, and it was so freaking cool, and I absolutely loved it. So so we just kept, we kept playing video games together. And then when I would hang out with my friends, we had arcades at the mall. So some of my friends were, shopping, and I was in the arcade. I was in the arcade playing games like Tekken and Soul Calibur, and and I really just I love fighting games, but story games like Dragon Warrior, like Dragon Quest, I love those games because then I started playing Final Fantasy and I love those too. And just I love story games a lot because just being able to play as that character and see where their story goes, and with exploring, especially with like the Final Fantasy games and with the Dragon Quest games, I love the fact that I could just explore wherever I wanted to and just see where the story took me, and just see what was out there. Because sometimes I just wouldn't even finish the story right away. I would just explore. I go, well, where does this go? Um, and I always loved it. And unfortunately, when you're a teenage girl, people don't necessarily understand why you like video games, why you like comic books. Or it's like, that's weird. And I went to a school where it was a lot of like football players and cheerleaders. Like, it was all about sports,
Hmm.
and the nerdy kids didn't really get noticed, or just like and I was okay with that. I was okay with being left alone. I was just like, I'll just read my comic books, play my video games. But you know in some ways is kind of lonely, because like some of the girls that I thought were nice, um they would just like, they would say things, kids say things to each other if they feel like you're other or you're
Yep.
different. And I was like, well, whatever, I don't care. I'm playing video games. Because gaming was fun for me, and it was like a nice escape to just like enjoy the story and see all these different characters and see where it took me. So there was that, but then of course you get like some of the boys that tell you like, well, girls can't play, and girls, and I had somebody get mad at me. It was a boy. He got mad at me because I beat him at Tekken. Like, we were doing playing a Tekken match in the arcade, and I won. And he got mad and he goes, "That's crap." He goes, "That's crap." He's like, "Girls can't be better than boys at video games." And I just remember standing there thinking, "Wow, really?"
Yep.
Okay, it's just a game. We're just having fun. And and he wasn't having it. He was like, "This is why I don't play with girls." Yeah, his friends started laughing at him, going, "Are you really this mad that a girl beat you? It's not that big a deal." Like she said, we're just having fun.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I've been playing games my entire life. Like Atari 2600 was my first, and Nintendo, and then we got Super Nintendo, right? And we played all those, and then the PlayStation came out. Um, and then PlayStation came out, and I got to play Suikoden 1 and 2, and Suikoden blew me away because that had such a good story. And I love the idea of basically being able to recruit all these different characters. And there was like 108 stars of destiny was the story. And each character had like a backstory and had a different ability that they brought, and you could switch in your parties. And the first two I played, you could have 6 people in your party. And basically it was like a mix of role playing and a mix of tactics.
Hmm.
And I love that. Like, I played so much Suikoden because I was like, this is amazing. And it also had this incredible story. And I thought that was really cool. And so every time like a new game would come out, and I got a little more discerning with my games as I got older, because I realized, I can't like be spending money on just like any game just because it's new, because it's expensive. It's an expensive thing to game. Um, so I got a little more discerning about it. And honestly, the big thing for me is like, am I interested in the story that they're trying to tell? Because that's the big thing for me. Like, yeah, graphics are great and everything, and gameplay is definitely important, but it's just like, I want a really good story. And if
Hmm.
you can get me to care about your characters, can get me to care about that story, then I want to play it. And I think that's why games like Dragon Age, Dragon Age and Mass Effect, and even Spiritfarer mean a lot to me, because I wanted to know what their stories were. Like, each character was just like, I want to know. Um, so like a good story is really important, and it's also why I love Ghost of Tsushima so much too, Like for me personally, Ghost of Tsushima is my game of the year because pretty much everything for me when I played that game was practically perfect. Like the story was so good, uh, the gameplay, the fact that they had things like photo mode where you could take photos of like landscape vistas in the game and you could share it with people. I also liked a really cool feature that they added, which was you can hug the foxes in the game. You basically go and find these fox shrines and you can hug the foxes. And I loved that. I loved everything about it. But the big draw for me was the story. The story was so well thought out and it was so good. So yeah, I like story games because I like living that story and seeing what happens next.
Absolutely. It's one of the things I remember, like I got my start, my dad had bought like an old, or not old, I will, an Apple computer way back in probably like the mid 80s. So I got my start with Frogger and track and field. But then, through the progression, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, but like my favorite game that I will forever die on my video game hill is Final Fantasy 2, which is the Japan numbering now. It's Final Fantasy 4, and I have such distinct memories of playing that game, and that is the game of like my game of preference is definitely role playing games and games that have story and let me sink 70 or 80 hours into it, and that's what I like. I don't have the time for it now. In fact, the last time I tried to play a game, which I think I was trying to play Final Fantasy X just to play it again. The kids were probably like 3 or 4 years younger at this point, and they were like, "When are you going to be done with the TV?" And if you're familiar with Final Fantasy X, like you just can't save anywhere. You got to go to a save sphere, and sometimes it is at least an hour or two away, or backtracking to go find one.
Yeah.
And I just gave up. I said, you know what, I can't play it with y'all right now. And another franchise that you mentioned is one that that has been on my list for a long time since it came out, is Dragon Age, because I know Dragon Age and Mass Effect have incredible stories, but
Yes.
there's so many of them, and they each take a number of hours to complete, and I'm just I don't got the time, but dang if I don't love watching people play through them so I can get the story. Now for you, like what are some of those like top favorite games? Like what are the games of like whatever generation, whatever console, like what are those games, like a top 3 or a top 5? Like what are the ones that are like your signature games of these are my games, these are what defined me as a gamer?
Mm. So okay, probably top five. Definitely Dragon Warrior 3, because that was the game that got me like hooked on RPGs. And then Suikoden 2 for sure. So Suikoden 2 was on the PS1, but you can play it on the PS3 now. Like you can like purchase it from their library. Um, because everybody goes on about like Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII, and he's really cool. Um, but Suikoden 2 has, in my opinion, one of the best villains, Luca Blight, because he's really nasty in the story, and he is a really well thought out, well written villain. And it just like the story was all about defeating him and taking him down, and I loved it. And plus, the artwork for Suikoden 2 is really good. Um, and then honestly, Dragon Age Origins, I played on the 360 because I loved the lore and the world building in Origins. It was so good, and you could play any way you wanted. Like you could have different endings depending on like what you decided or what you picked. And I had never really played a game like that before, and I thought that was really cool. That basically the decisions were up to me. Like yeah, they're like, well, this is what happens if you make this decision. or you could choose to do something entirely different, and then the story would have an entirely different outcome. And I always thought that was really cool. And honestly, Mass Effect is on there too, uh, because science fiction. Science fiction. Plus, I really like the story. I like Shepard's story a lot, and that was another one where you could make different decisions, and you could kind of change the outcome of the story a little bit, or change the character story. Um, and Kingdoms of Amalur, Reckoning. That's the last one. I fell in love with that game, and I was really sad about what happened to the studio that created it, because it had so much potential. And just like the open world, everything in it was beautiful. The gameplay was fun. The story was really interesting. Even the side quest stories that you play too were really neat. And there was a lot of lore about the Fae and different factions of Fae. Plus, I was fascinated by the fact that R.A. Salvatore basically helped them write like a lot of the lore for the game. Like he helped write a majority of the lore for the game, like basically about the Fae factions, about the world history. And he's one of my favorite fantasy writers, so I thought that was really freaking cool. And then Kingdoms of Amalur got a remaster on the PS4, and it's really good. And apparently, he is working on writing a new DLC specifically for the remaster. So I'm just like, that's awesome. But those games are games that I love playing, that I never get tired of playing. I always like playing through them again. Dragon Warrior 3 is so old though, you have to do it with like a simulator.
Yeah.
But the other games, I never get tired of playing through them. Because I like to play through games again, especially if it's something that I really like. So just relive the story again. I'm like, okay, I'm finished, and I'll play something else. But then those are the games that I'll always come back to and do like another playthrough.
I totally feel that. Like there's a lot of the games, especially at this point in time, a lot of the games for me I just can't do. I'm not one of the people who can do a lot of like multiple control schematics like in my brain, like okay, kneel, crouch, turn, shoot. um if you do a combination of these three buttons, it does something. If you do a different combination, it does something else. Like I can't do that. Like I need my time.
Right.
Like I watched somebody play the new Final Fantasy VII, the remake, or and I watched them. I said, nope, I can't play that. I can't play like the action adventure type games like that, or Kingdom Hearts, or Legend of Zelda. Like my brain doesn't work like that. Like I need turn based or something where I have time to think, and it's like okay, it's slow enough for me to process and figure out my next move, or something where I can pause it and be like, okay, let me take a moment with it. But I am always in awe of people who can just do that and just pick up on it. And like I always think back to when I was a kid learning how to play games, and my parents were like out of their element, and I see my kids playing games now, and I am totally out of the element of whatever they are doing. I'm just like I have no clue. Like you go play the game, and I'll watch you. Now with gaming, you have also you are also a Twitch streamer.
Yes.
How did you decide to take that leap from just playing video games to playing video games and also broadcasting it out there for people to watch?
So I started streaming on Twitch 2 years ago. I play Final Fantasy 14 with some friends. And these friends, I played Final Fantasy 11 with them before. And Final Fantasy 11 is how I met my husband Ron. We got to like being friends, and so we played Final Fantasy 11 together, and then we made the move to Final Fantasy 14. So I would always type in chat, and my buddies said, hey, we have TeamSpeak, we can talk on the mic and everything. And I said, no, that's okay. Like I felt really, really freaking anxious about talking on a mic. I'm like, nope, don't want to do it. And and they kept trying to like gently like suggest to me like, hey, we have voice chat. You wanna come hang? You don't have to type in chat. I'm like, nope, I'm good with typing. Everything's cool. And they said, what is going on here? And I explained to them that, I was actually a very, I'm actually a very anxious person, believe it or not. And it's like, and I don't like how my voice sounds. And yeah, and one of my friends, she said, well, I don't understand why. And I said, because so when I was a kid and when I was a young woman, I was like, I had people kind of tease me about my voice, about the fact that I sounded to them like a kid. And I said, what? You don't sound like a kid. And I said, well, one time I answered the phone and the person, I guess it was somebody selling something, and said, oh, is your mom or dad home, little girl? And I said, I'm an adult. They went, oh, I'm so sorry. I said, so I don't like talking on the mic. And my friend said, well, maybe you could, just like practice, just try to do it. And I was like, no, I'll think about it. And I found Twitch again because of Ron. Like he was watching a streamer, and I said, "Who is that?" So I started watching Twitch, and I started making friends on there. And um, there's one streamer that I'm on for, and I was watching his streams, and he was always very kind and very encouraging. And he talks about mental health a lot in his streams. I was like, "This is really cool. I've never seen something like this." And I mentioned about how I'm scared to just like talk on I'm scared to talk on a mic. I don't want to do it. He goes, well, maybe you can like challenge yourself to do something that scares you. So I was just like, well, I don't know. I don't know about this, but I got more and more interested in at least trying. I was just like, okay, well, I've never done this before. And this is like, so I was just like, I'm going to try and do something that scares me. Is like, well, what scares me is like, I don't like talking on the mic. I don't like my voice. I don't like my voice. I don't like it. Um, and so I was talking to Ron about it, and he was very supportive and encouraging and said, well, it might be good for you. You never know. Um, so the first night that I ever streamed on Twitch, I didn't use the mic. I just typed in chat. It was a disaster. I only streamed for like 2 hours, but I was really nervous about it. I was just like, okay, it's just like this is a little more challenging than I thought. So it was just like just talk on the mic, it'll be okay. So the second night I tried streaming and I tried talking on the mic, and my voice was really shaky. I was really nervous and I was really anxious, and it was like, this is really hard. But I did it, and afterwards I was just like, wow, I actually did it. I did something that scared me. Nothing bad happened. Everything was okay. um so I kept, so I tried to like figure out like what I wanted my schedule to be and what I wanted to do and like what kind of games I wanted to play. And I realized I wanted to do variety. Like I wanted to be able to play games that I enjoyed and share them with other people, while also talking about mental health, about, because I felt like not enough people talk about it, or they talk about it in hushed whispers
Hmm.
instead of just, treating it like a normal conversation, because it is normal. A lot of people have issues with, their mental health, whether it's depression or anxiety, borderline personality disorder, bipolar disorder. Everyone has, it's not like nobody has a bad day or has issues with their mental health. Um, so I was like, okay. And basically I went from being like I still have anxious days, of course, because anxiety, but um but as I started talking more and more, it got easier. Like it got easier to do it, and I was basically able to like get better with practice. And there are still days where I would just, because there was one day where just like nothing was going right, everything was breaking, like my stream crashed and the audio got muted. And, and I was just like, I don't know what's going on. And then the game crashed, and I said, oh no. And I could just like feel my anxiety just like going through the roof, just going, just like little by little. And I said, oh no. And I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And then the people that were hanging out with me during my stream, they surprised me because they were really supportive. They said, "Hey, are you okay? What's going on?" And I was just like, "Well," and I thought to myself, "Well, I have two choices. I can either say everything's fine, thumbs up, or just be honest." And so I chose honesty and I said, "Look, I'm feeling really anxious. Everything's breaking and I'm really trying, but I don't know how to fix it and I'm sorry." And everyone was so kind, like incredibly kind, incredibly supportive, going, "Oh, that's okay. It happens. Lots of people go through this." And they were so encouraging and so helpful, and it made me feel better.
Hmm.
Um, and so here we are 2 years later. I'm still streaming on Twitch. And we talk about mental health, but we talk about video games too, and um, random things. Like people sometimes ask me like knitting or cooking questions. Um, but I found I love doing it. I love streaming and sharing games with people, and honestly, it makes me really happy to hear somebody say like, "Well, I saw you playing the Spiritfarer, and it made me want to go play it, so I bought it for myself, and I'm playing the game while you're playing it." Like that's cool. Like that's really cool to just be able to like show people games that I personally enjoy, and then hearing them, seeing them say like, "Well, it made me want to play it because it looks like you're really having fun with it." And I'm like, "That's awesome." um I'm still not comfortable being in front of a camera because I don't like the idea of like being in front of the camera, but talking on the mic I'm actually okay with now. It took me a little while, but I got there, and we celebrated 2 years in September. So who knows? We'll see where it goes.
That's awesome. Congratulations on being not only like doing it the first time, but keeping on doing it and doing it for as long as you have. That's an accomplishment.
Thank you.
Now with the games that you like to play, because again, variety streamer,
Mhm.
um how do you make the decision on which games you're going to show off? Because obviously with Twitch streaming, some games definitely lend themselves better to having people watch them. Some games are definitely not that way, and you're like, oh gosh, like
Yeah.
this does not work for a stream. So how do you go about choosing the games that you want to show off to people?
Well, sometimes I think about like how long a game is, and I'm just like, well, okay, is it going to be short or is it going to be really long? With games like Dragon Age, I know that I can do multiple playthroughs of that, and actually we have. Um, and I think about like, well, are people going to be interested in the story? Are they going to be interested in the lore? And other times, I just kind of decide, what, really want to play this game. Um, and maybe a lot of people won't show up, but that's okay because I would rather play things that I enjoy and enjoy, because if you're not having fun with the game or you don't like it, it definitely shows. And I had an issue with one indie game called Sparklight. uh, I like I like the game. I like Sparklighter. It's very cute and it's very indie and it's really cool and it has a really cool story and it has a really cool concept, and it definitely feels kind of like a little nod to like the Legend of Zelda games. But my problem was some of the difficulty mechanics. Basically, it sometimes it would be okay and you could like fight the monsters and everything would be good, but then there'd be like this sudden like difficulty spike in some of the bosses and I died a lot. And it got a little frustrating. I said, "You know what? I don't think I'm enjoying this." This is a lot. Um, and my community was really supportive. They were like, "Oh, you know what? If you want to switch games, it's cool, because." And I was honest with them. I told them I can feel myself getting frustrated. I was like, "I like the game, but this is really frustrating and really challenging, And I was like, and I don't really want to play a game that makes me feel like it's starting to be rage inducing. And they're just like, okay, that's cool. So I try to think about like, okay, is it gonna be like something I can just like chill out to and we can just like have a good time? Or is it gonna be like Sparklighter where I feel like I want to throw my controller? And I was like, okay. Sometimes I don't know what I want to play, honestly. Like sometimes I have like two games in mind and I'm sitting there staring at each game going, well, okay, well, which one? And it sounds silly, but sometimes I just flip a coin. Like just, just go, flip a coin, it's fine. Um, but most of the time I know right away what I want to play. I'm just like, okay, I want to play this story. I want to share this with everyone. We're actually doing that with Mass Effect Andromeda. Right now we're playing Valhalla, but I've been switching with Andromeda because I feel like Mass Effect Andromeda didn't get a fair shot.
Mhm.
And I understand why people don't like it, why people think it's like the worst Mass Effect. But in my personal opinion, I don't think it's the worst one. I like, yes, it has flaws for sure. There are definitely some story loopholes, and there's a couple of bugs with a couple of the quests here and there. But I thought the story was really cool, and I like the character of Ryder, like the Ryder twins. And there's really cool world building with it. Like they're trying to make a new life in an entirely different galaxy, and then they added new aliens to it, and of course there's like the fun romance stuff that people like. But I thought it was really cool, and much like Dragon Age 2, it runs alongside the same story. Like it's in the same timeline. So Andromeda takes place between Mass Effect 2 and 3. So it runs parallel to those stories, just like Dragon Age 2 ran parallel to Origins.
Mhm.
Um, so people were asking about it, and I said, well, we can play it and I can show you guys. And so we've been playing it, and there have been a couple of people that have said, I don't think the game's that bad. Like the story's actually really cool. The Angara, like the new aliens they added, they're really neat. I said, yeah. So it's actually gotten people to give it a chance that were kind of like, oh, I didn't play it because everybody said it was bad. But now that I'm watching you play it, it doesn't seem that bad. So it's like things like that, like trying to show them, like, look, here's the story for this game. It's not as bad as everyone makes it out to be. Sometimes you just gotta play a game yourself and decide for yourself whether or not you like it. And if you don't like it, cool. At least you tried it. But don't write it off if you haven't tried it yet. Just give it a chance. Because sometimes if you don't give it a chance, you miss out on some really great games, or you miss out on a game that has a really good story. And Andromeda, the story is actually really neat. So, so we just try and like switch. So we've been switching between Valhalla and Andromeda, and Valhalla is really good too. But I think they need to do a patch because there have definitely been some glitches. Like one of the quests I did, uh, I couldn't talk to the guy because he kept sliding and sitting on the chair and then sliding back up and then sliding on the chair. And I said, okay, that's obviously a glitch. So I had to reset the game and then it let me do it. Um, or or it crashes a couple times. And they said they're working on a patch, so hopefully that stuff will get fixed soon. But from what I've played of it, it's an amazing game. I really like open world stuff. I like being able to explore and basically getting to like see where the next thing takes me, because the map in Valhalla, you don't necessarily know where you're going, so you get to climb everywhere and you get to look around, and just the exploration aspect of it I'm really enjoying.
That is really awesome. I love especially when you get to see games where like with Andromeda, you're like there's been so much I guess I can just say smack talk about it,
Yeah.
about when it came out, and people are like, this isn't what I wanted. And I saw something earlier today of like a meme about a fandom and a fan is like, oh, I really love this stuff. I'd like you to make more of it. So then they make more of it and they're like, no, but we want something new. And then they make something new and they're like, no, but it's not how I wanted it like the old thing, but different. But
Yeah.
we made it different. But that's not what I wanted. And it has that cyclical thing of you want it, but you don't want it new, but you want it different, but you don't want it that different. You want it, and it just goes on and on. Because
Yeah.
I'd heard a number of people say, and I think there's some like graphical issues too with Andromeda that people had mentioned. But some people that I remember hearing about, they said that they enjoyed the game.
Yeah.
And it came. I don't know if it came out at just like a weird time or there was like a rush to get it out, but yeah, it's definitely something. I know that they did announce that they're remastering all three of the Mass Effects and releasing it at some point this year or next year.
Yeah, sometime next year they are, and people are excited. I mean, I'm excited about it too, and of course, our community on Twitch, said, Mom, are you gonna be playing this? And I was like, yes, of course. It's like we will play the space opera, Smoochy Aliens time, and they're all cheering, like, all right. So so definitely we'll be playing the remaster because I do like the Mass Effect games, but yeah, as you said, Andromeda didn't really get a fair chance, and part of it is EA because they did rush it. They rushed them, and then they started pulling. Apparently, they pulled like lead artists off to work on Anthem, so Andromeda didn't get the time or attention it needed because EA is like, well, you have to work on Anthem, do this, and so unfortunately, Andromeda kind of got screwed over.
Mhm.
So, and then, you have the Mass Effect fandom where a lot of people were mad because they're like, this isn't what we wanted. And it's just like, well, okay. And I see their point, but I played the game and I loved it. I actually really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the story. And it's just like, yeah, it's not necessarily, the story with like Shepard and the Mass Effect universe, but it is a Mass Effect story. It's just not Shepard's story, and I think that might have been part of the problem too. Is like everybody expected more with Shepard, and they
Mhm.
got Ryder. But the thing is Ryder's not a bad character either. Like both, they're twin. It's a twin brother and sister because you can play as a male or female Ryder, but they're good characters and their story is actually pretty interesting, and you can play them however you want because BioWare, that's how they do it. You make the decisions, you play as that character, you are that character. So the decisions are up to you. You get to decide. Um, so it's nice to see that while I have been playing it on Twitch, to hear that people decided to give it a chance after watching me play it. They're like, well, you know what? It's actually not that bad. So like, yeah, it's just like it's not like the dumpster fire a lot of people made it out to be. It's actually a good game.
I have to ask, out of curiosity, what has been your like I don't know if I'd say best or favorite, but what's been your best Twitch moment for you in the 2 years that you've been streaming?
Oh wow. The best moment, honestly, I would have to say, in 2 years is raising money for Trevor Project for Mental Health Awareness Month. It was my first charity stream ever. I never done a charity stream, and so I asked advice from people I knew and who'd done it before, and they were really helpful and really supportive. And our community came together and they did a great job. Just they were so encouraging and supportive, and they helped, and we were able to raise $500 for Trevor Project for that month. And I'd never done that before because I was worried initially. It was just like, what if nobody donates? What do I do? And it was just I got nervous and I got anxious, and it was like, oh man, this is gonna be terrible if nobody donates. I was like, what do I do? So, but um, but everybody came together and just blew me away, and I was like, that's really awesome, and it made me so happy because Trevor Project does so much good
Hmm.
for young people, and we were talking about it, um, and it was really incredible and touching to see our community come together and raise money. And so we were able to raise $500. And the thing is that was like, because I started small, because everybody said, well, just pick like a small goal because it's your first time. And I was like, okay. So originally I was like, okay, we'll raise $200 for Trevor Project. And then everybody came together and it was $500, and I cried because I was floored by like how generous everyone in our community was. And I was humbled by that. That there's like that, so many of them shared their stories too. Just like, one person even said that Trevor Project helped them. And Trevor Project actually helped my oldest daughter. Um, she was on her own, and she was moved out by then, but she was on her own. She didn't know what to do, um, and she was really trying to like talk to someone about it. And she talks to us, but sometimes you just need to talk to someone your own age,
Right.
when you're a young person. And she was able to do that, and they really helped her. She said the person that talked to her was really kind and caring. So I wanted to give something back uh, because whoever she talked to on the phone from Trevor Project, they helped her. They helped her when she needed that help. So for me, that was the best moment, just being able to give something back and just do something good with my platform, with my community.
Mm-hmm. That's incredibly awesome that you not only were able to do it, but not you met the goal that you set for yourself and then exceeded it. It is really incredible, and that is a testament not only to you as a streamer, but the community that you've built that supports you, and that is wonderful.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we have kind of run to a wonderful, I think, a good place here with what we have talked about today.
Okay.
So for those people who have listened to this episode and they're like, dang, I need to go find Mother Gamer out there on the internet, what are the best places to do so?
Well, of course, there's Twitch. I stream on Twitch as Mother Gamer. And then there's Twitter at MotherGamer28, and Instagram, which is also at MotherGamer28.
Wonderful. I will make sure to have the links on the show notes and on the Facebook page. So that way, if you're interested in hanging out, watching Mother Gamer stream some games, or even just following her on Instagram or Twitter, you can do so with a click of the button. And I just want to take a moment to say thank you for taking the time out of your evening. As we record this in November, again, it's going to be a January episode, but thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your stories with me, especially, the stories about your grandmother, which I absolutely adored them. So just thank you.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/talesfromthefandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.